The needle trembled in Elena's calloused fingers as she stared at the faded photograph that had fallen from the torn lining of the expensive cashmere coat. Through the worn edges of the image, a young woman with familiar eyes gazed back at her. Elena had seen only in her family's oldest albums and in her own reflection. The wealthy businessman would return for his repairs in less than an hour, never knowing that the coat he'd carelessly tossed across her counter contained the missing piece of Elena's shattered past. "Fix it properly," he had demanded without looking at her, sliding a stack of bills that exceeded the repair cost tenfold. But as Elena traced the outline of the mysterious woman's face, she realized this chance encounter might mend far more than damaged fabric. Who was this woman in the photograph? And why did the coldest man in the city carry her image hidden where no one could see it? If this story touches your heart, please comment, like and subscribe to our channel, and share any similar chance encounters that changed your life. Elena Vasquez wiped the condensation from the window of her small tailor shop and peered out at the gentrifying neighborhood she barely recognized anymore. Artisanal coffee shops and boutiques had replaced the family-owned businesses that once lined these streets. Elena's alterations remained, a stubborn holdout against rising rents and changing times. She turned back to her workstation, where a half-dozen garments awaited her attention. The electric bill she'd set aside glared at her from beneath a pincushion. Third notice? She would pay it tomorrow after Mrs. Abernathy picked up her altered dress. The bell above the door jingled, and Elena looked up, plastering on her professional smile. The man who entered seemed to bring the December chill with him, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that Elena immediately recognized as bespoke Italian craftsmanship. His silver-flecked dark hair and sharp features gave him a distinguished appearance, but his eyes cold, assessing, impatient made Elena straighten her posture. "I need this repaired," he said without greeting, placing a folded cashmere overcoat on her counter. "The lining is torn." Elena gently unfolded the coat, a beautiful charcoal Loro Piana that probably cost more than 6 months of her rent. "Of course, sir. When would you tomorrow?" he interrupted, checking his watch. "I have an important dinner." Elena hesitated. "Sir, rush orders, typically. Will this cover it?" He placed $500 bills on the counter, at least 5 times her standard rush fee. Elena stared at the money. With this, she could pay her electric bill, rent, and still have some left over for her mother's medication. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, writing up a receipt. "May I have your name for the order?" "Alexander Reed," he replied, already turning toward the door. "I'll be back at 5 tomorrow." Elena watched him leave, then carefully laid the coat on her work table. It was only as she examined the torn silk lining that she saw it a small, yellowed corner of what appeared to be a photograph, tucked deep in the interior pocket where the lining had split. As she gently extracted it, she gasped. A young woman stared back at her from decades past, her dark eyes haunting and familiar. Elena's hands began to shake. The face in the photograph could have been her grandmother's, the same grandmother whose disappearance had left a wound in her family that had never healed. Elena sat heavily on her stool, the expensive coat forgotten as she studied the image. The woman wore a simple dress, her hair styled in the fashion of the late 1960s. She wasn't smiling exactly, but there was a quiet dignity in her expression that Elena recognized from old family photos. "Abuela," she whispered, though she knew it couldn't be. Yet the resemblance was uncanny, the same high cheekbones, the same slight asymmetry to the eyes that Elena herself had inherited. Her mind raced. How had a photo that looked so much like her grandmother ended up in the coat of a wealthy stranger? And what should she do about it? Elena set the photograph aside and began the repair, her usually steady hands betraying her distraction. With each stitch, questions multiplied. Should she mention the photograph when Alexander Reed returned? Would he even care? Or would he dismiss her, as the wealthy often dismissed those they considered beneath their notice? Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the city in white. Inside Elena's small shop, a mystery unfolded with each careful stitch she placed in the expensive coat's lining. Night had fallen by the time Elena locked up her shop. The photograph sat on her kitchen table as she prepared a simple dinner in her small apartment above the store. Steam rose from a pot of arroz con palo, the recipe her mother had taught her, which had been passed down from her grandmother. Elena's thoughts drifted to the stories her mother told of Abuela Carmen, a proud woman who had come to America in the 1960s with nothing but determination. She had worked for wealthy families, sending money home until she could bring her daughter Elena's mother to join her. Then, when Elena's mother was just 16, Carmen had vanished. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone, leaving her daughter alone in a strange country. "She would never abandon me," Elena's mother had insisted for years. Something happened to her, but as decades passed with no word, even she had begun to doubt. Elena picked up the photograph again. The woman's eyes seemed to hold secrets. If this was indeed her grandmother, what connection did she have to Alexander Reed? The man was in his 50s, too young to have known her grandmother as an adult. Perhaps his father. The coat was expensive, but not new. She set her dinner aside, appetite gone, and retrieved an old photo album from her bedroom closet. The binding cracked as she opened it, revealing faded photographs preserved behind yellowing plastic sheets. Their family photo from before the disappearance. Elena's mother, as a teenager, standing beside Carmen. Elena gasped. The resemblance between the woman in Alexander Reed's coat and her grandmother was undeniable. Same eyes, same proud tilt of the chin. This couldn't be coincidence. She stayed up late into the night, searching through family mementos, looking for clues that might connect her grandmother to the Reed family. By morning, her eyes were red-rimmed, but she was no closer to answers. The workday passed in a blur. Elena completed her regular orders mechanically, her attention constantly drawn to Alexander Reed's coat hanging by her workstation. The photograph now burned in her pocket like a hot coal dot. At precisely 5 o'clock, the bell above the door chimed. Alexander Reed entered, his expression as impassive as before. "Good evening," Elena said, her heart hammering. "Your coat is ready." He nodded, reaching for his wallet. "Sir," Elena began, her mouth dry. "While repairing your coat, I found something." She carefully withdrew the photograph from her pocket. Alexander's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as he saw what she held. For a brief moment, his composed facade cracked, revealing something raw beneath pain, anger, surprise. It vanished so quickly, Elena almost doubted she'd seen it. "That belongs to me," he said, his voice controlled but tight. "I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to pry," Elena said quickly. "It's just this woman looks remarkably like my grandmother, Carmen Vasquez. She worked for wealthy families in this city before she disappeared in 1975. Alexander's face had gone pale. He reached for the photograph with a hand that trembled slightly. "This is nothing important," he said, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him, an old family acquaintance, nothing more. He tucked the photograph into his inner suit pocket and grabbed the repaired coat. As he turned to leave, Elena called after him, "Mr. Reed, please. If you know anything about my grandmother, I don't." He cut her off sharply. "This has nothing to do with you or your family." The door closed behind him with finality. Elena stood frozen behind her counter. The encounter? Over so quickly she wondered if she'd imagined the whole thing. Only as she began to clean up, did she notice a business card that must have fallen from his pocket. Alexander Reed, CEO, Reed Enterprises. It read, with an address in the financial district. Elena picked it up, noticing the slight indentation of his fingers where he'd gripped it too tightly. Whatever connection existed between Alexander Reed and the woman in the photograph, one thing was certain. His reaction had not been that of a man dismissing an unimportant family acquaintance. Outside her shop window, Alexander Reed paused on the sidewalk, one hand pressed against his chest where the photograph lay. His face, unobserved, showed a man haunted by ghosts he couldn't escape. Elena couldn't sleep. The image of Alexander Reed's face when he saw the photograph played on repeat in her mind. She had seen something there, recognition, shock, perhaps even fear. Whatever his connection to the woman in the photo, it was deeply personal. She called her mother the next morning. "Mama, do you remember if Abuela ever mentioned working for a family named Reed?" Her mother's silence stretched over the line. "Why do you ask about this now, after so many years?" Elena hesitated. "I met someone who might have known her. It's probably nothing." Elena, her mother's voice had grown serious. "Some doors are better left closed. Your grandmother, there were complications in her life. What does that mean?" "It means the past should stay in the past." Her mother changed the subject, asking about the shop and Elena's health. After they hung up, Elena felt more determined than ever. Her mother knew something she wasn't sharing. The Reed family had been part of her grandmother's life and, perhaps, part of her disappearance. Across town, in a penthouse overlooking the city, Alexander Reed poured himself a third scotch. The photograph lay on his desk, its edges worn from years of handling. He hadn't looked at it in months, had almost convinced himself he'd moved beyond it, but seeing it in the hands of that seamstress had ripped open wounds he thought had scarred over. He picked up the photograph, studying the face he knew better, from this image than from memory. Isabella, not his mother, never, but the woman who had haunted his childhood home like a ghost. Her name had been whispered during his parents' arguments, spat like venom from his mother's lips. She was the reason for the coldness that had permeated their home. Alexander had been only 7 when Isabella disappeared, but he remembered the aftermath, his father's descent into drinking, his mother's brittle triumph, the household staff afraid to speak above a whisper for months. He'd found this photograph years later, hidden in his father's study after the old man's death. The only evidence that Isabella had been real, not just a figure from the family's private mythology of pain. And now her granddaughter, it had to be her granddaughter. The resemblance was unmistakable, had appeared in his life like an apparition. From the past, Elena Vasquez. The name confirmed what the face suggested. He drained his scotch, grimacing at the burn. How much did Elena know? What had her family told her about Isabella, about his father, about the events of night? His phone rang, his executive assistant reminding him about tomorrow's board meeting. Alexander forced himself back to the present, tucking the photograph into his desk drawer. Whatever ghosts Elena Vasquez had stirred up, he couldn't allow them to interfere with his carefully constructed life. Reed Enterprises had just secured a major development deal that would transform 3 city blocks of older buildings, including the neighborhood where her little shop stood, into luxury apartments and high-end retail space. He would simply avoid the seamstress, find another tailor, forget this strange encounter. But as he reviewed the development plans later that evening, he found himself searching for the address of Elena's alterations. There it was, a tiny dot in the blueprint, marked for demolition in Phase 2 of the project in 6 months. Her shop would be gone, another casualty of the city's relentless evolution. Alexander felt an unexpected twinge of, what? Not guilt? Surely. He'd overseen dozens of similar projects, displacing hundreds of small businesses over the years. It was simply progress, the invisible hand of the market at work. Yet he found himself staring at her address on the plans, remembering the quiet dignity with which she'd handled their encounter, the same quiet dignity he'd seen in the photograph of Isabella, the same eyes. He closed the blueprint file and poured another scotch, but he couldn't escape the feeling that something had been set in motion, something beyond his control. For a man who had built his empire on control, the sensation was deeply unsettling. Across the city, Elena sat at her kitchen table, Alexander Reed's business card in her hand. Tomorrow, she decided, tomorrow she would find out what connection this wealthy stranger had to her grandmother, and why the mere sight of her photograph had shaken him so deeply. The Reed Enterprises building dominated the skyline, 60 floors of gleaming glass and steel that seemed to look down on the rest of the city with the same cold disdain as its owner. Elena stood on the sidewalk across the street, her courage faltering as business people in expensive suits streamed through the revolving doors. What was she doing here? This wasn't her world. These weren't her people. But the image of her grandmother's face in that photograph steeled her resolve. After 20 minutes of self-doubt, she straightened her modest coat, crossed the street, and entered the building. The security guard at the reception desk barely glanced at her. "Can I help you? I'd like to see Mr. Alexander Reed, please." Elena tried to keep her voice steady. The guard looked up now, taking in her worn boots and the small repair kit she carried as her excuse for the visit. His eyebrow raised slightly. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I have his coat. An additional repair." She held up the paper bag containing an identical coat to the one she'd purchased that morning from a second-hand shop. Using most of the money Alexander had overpaid her, the guard's expression made it clear he didn't believe her. But he picked up his phone. After a brief conversation, he shook his head. "Mr. Reed is in meetings all day. You can leave whatever you have, and someone will get it to him." Elena clutched the bag tighter. "I need to deliver it personally. It's a delicate repair." "That's not possible. Mr. Reed sees people by appointment only." Elena's shoulders slumped. Of course it wouldn't be this easy. What had she expected? She turned to leave, disappointment bitter in her throat, when the elevator doors opened and a crowd of suited executives emerged. Among them Alexander Reed, himself, deep in conversation with an older man. Elena froze. Alexander hadn't seen her yet. She could still leave. Forget this wild quest for answers about a grandmother who had disappeared decades ago. Instead, she stepped forward. "Mr. Reed," he looked up, irritation at the interruption clear on his face. When he recognized her, the irritation transformed into something more complex. Shock? Discomfort? Perhaps even fear. "The seamstress," he said flatly. The executives around him turned, curious. Lena felt their stares like physical pressure. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, suddenly conscious of how out of place she must appear. "I had a question about your coat." Alexander's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he might simply ignore her and walk away. Instead, he turned to his companions. "Excuse me for a moment, gentlemen, a small business matter." He grasped Elena's elbow not roughly, but firmly, and guided her toward a small conference room off the lobby. Once inside, he closed the door and turned to her, anger flashing in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" Elena stood her ground. "I want to know about the woman in the photograph, the one who looks exactly like my grandmother. I told you, she was a family acquaintance. Nothing more." "You're lying." The words escaped before Elena could censor herself. "I saw your face when you saw that photo. She meant something to you or your family." Alexander paced the small room, tension radiating from him. "Listen carefully, Ms. Vasquez. That photograph and whoever is in it have nothing to do with you. Coming to my office like this is inappropriate and frankly bizarre." Her name was Carmen Vasquez. Elena pressed on. "She worked for wealthy families in this city until 1975, when she disappeared without a trace. If you know anything, I don't," he snapped, but too quickly, too forcefully. Elena studied his face, handsome in its severity, but lined with what she now recognized as years of buried pain. "That woman," she said quietly, "was important to you." Something in Alexander seemed to crack just for a moment. He turned away, staring out the window at the city below. "I was 7 years old when I last saw her," he said, his voice so low Elena had to strain to hear it. "She was our housekeeper." Elena's heart pounded. "Our housekeeper. My family's." Alexander turned back to her, his composure regained. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run." "Wait," Elena said desperately. "Please. She was my grandmother. She disappeared without a word. My mother was left alone, just a teenager in a strange country. We never knew what happened to her. Alexander's expression hardened again. Perhaps she had her reasons for leaving. The cruelty of the suggestion stung Elena. She wouldn't abandon her daughter. Something happened to her. For a beat, doubt flickered across Alexander's face. Then he checked his watch. I have a meeting. Don't come here again, Ms. Vasquez. He opened the door, pausing on the threshold. Find another quest for family redemption. This one won't give you the answers you're hoping for. He left Elena standing alone in the conference room, more confused than ever but certain of one thing. Alexander Reed knew far more than he was, willing to share about her grandmother's fate. Elena was still shaking when she reached the sidewalk outside Reed Enterprises. The confrontation had yielded one crucial piece of information. Her grandmother had worked for the Reed family. Alexander had known her had been a child when she disappeared. The connection was real, not imagined. Whatever had happened to Carmen Vasquez, Alexander Reed was linked to it somehow. She was so lost in thought that she nearly collided with a woman exiting the building. I'm sorry, Elena said automatically. The woman, middle-aged, stylishly dressed, with a tablet clutched at her chest, tilted her head. You're the woman who was speaking with Mr. Reed just now. Elena tensed. Yes, I'm his, Taylor. I'm Janet Winters, Mr. Reed's executive assistant. The woman's expression was curious rather than suspicious. You must be quite talented. Mr. Reed is extremely particular about his clothing. Elena managed a smile. I try to do quality work. Janet's eyes narrowed slightly. Funny, I've scheduled all of Mr. Reed's appointments for 15 years, including with his regular tailor on 5th Avenue. Elena felt heat rise to her face. I did a repair job for him recently, his coat lining. Ah, Janet nodded, seemingly satisfied. Well, you made quite an impression. He asked me to get your contact information before you left. He did. Elena couldn't hide her surprise. Janet handed her a business card. Call my direct line tomorrow. Mr. Reed has some additional items he'd like you to work on. She smiled. Consider yourself lucky. He rarely gives second chances when someone interrupts his meetings. Before Elena could respond, Janet disappeared back into the building, leaving Elena staring at the card in bewilderment. By evening, Elena's confusion had transformed into determination. She cleaned up her small workstation and locked the shop, then climbed the narrow stairs to her apartment. Her phone rang just as she was heating up leftover soup for dinner. Hello, Senora and Vasquez. Alexander Reed. Elena nearly dropped the phone. Mr. Reed, I wasn't expecting. No, I imagine not. His voice was clipped, businesslike. I've considered our conversation today. You have questions, I may have some answers. But not over the phone. Elena's pulse quickened. I appreciate that. When my driver will pick you up at your shop tomorrow. At 7, we'll have dinner and discuss the matter once. After that, I expect this intrusion into my private affairs to end. That's good night, Miss Vasquez. The line went dead. Elena stood in her tiny kitchen, the phone still pressed to her ear, torn between indignation at his arrogance and excitement at the prospect of learning the truth about her grandmother. Following evening, precisely at 7, a black Bentley idled outside her shop. The driver, solemn uniformed, opened the door without speaking. Elena slid into the leather interior, suddenly conscious of her simple dress and worn coat. 20 minutes later, they arrived not at a restaurant as she'd expected, but at a converted warehouse on the riverfront. The driver escorted her to a private elevator that opened directly into a sprawling loft. Alexander Reed stood at a wall of windows overlooking the water, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He turned as the elevator doors closed behind Elena. Ms. Vasquez, I'm Mr. Reed. She remained near the elevator, unsure of the protocol in such a setting. Drink. He gestured toward a bar cart. Double quotes. No, thank you. Alexander nodded, taking a seat in one of 2 leather chairs positioned near the windows. He indicated that she should sit in the other. This was my father's private retreat, he said once she was seated. Not even my mother knew about it. He would come here too. Escape. His eyes fixed on the cityscape beyond the glass. To remember? Elena waited, sensing he needed to proceed at his own pace. The woman in the photograph, Isabella we called her, was indeed your grandmother. Carmen Isabella Vasquez. He took a sip of his drink. She worked for my family from 1968 until 1975. As your housekeeper, Elena prompted when he fell silent. Alexander's laugh was without humor. That was her official role. Yes. But she was much more than that to my father. Understanding dawned on Elena. They were having an affair. Yes. For years. Alexander's fingers tightened around his glass. My mother knew. Everyone knew, though no one acknowledged it. It was a different time. What happened to her? Elena asked, her throat tight. Alexander's gaze turned to her, his eyes hard. She left. Like so many others in my father's life, she eventually saw him for what he was, and left. Without her daughter? Without a word? Elena shook her head. I don't believe it. Believe what you want. Alexander drained his glass. People leave. They lie. They betray. That's the reality of the world, Ms. Vasquez. Not whatever sentimental fairy tale you've constructed about your long-lost grandmother. The cruelty of his words stung, but Elena saw beyond them to the wounded man beneath. You were just a child when she disappeared. What do you actually remember about her? Alexander stood abruptly and walked to the bar to refill his drink. Well, when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its edge. She was kind. She would sing while she worked. He stared into his glass. She taught me Spanish when my mother wasn't around. She called me Pequeño León, little lion. The ghost of a smile touched his lips before vanishing. And then one day, she was gone. My father locked himself in his study for a week. My mother walked around the house like she'd won some victory, but it was hollow, and no one ever heard from her again. Elena pressed. Alexander turned to face her. Ms. Vasquez, I've told you what I know. Whether you choose to accept it is your concern, not mine. He set down his untouched second drink. However, I find I have several garments that require attention. My assistant will deliver them to your shop tomorrow. Elena blinked at the abrupt change of subject. Mr. Reed, that will be all for tonight. My driver will take you home. As if on cue, the elevator doors opened behind her. Alexander had already turned back to the window, dismissing her as effectively as if she'd vanished from the room. In the car, Elena replayed their conversation. Alexander had revealed just enough to confirm the connection between their families, but she sensed he was holding back whether to protect himself or someone else. She couldn't tell. One thing was certain, this wasn't the end of their conversation. Regardless of what Alexander Reed might wish. True to Alexander's word, Janet Winters arrived at Elena's shop the following morning with 3 garment bags. Mr. Reed would like these altered according to the notes I've attached, she said, placing them carefully on Elena's counter. He's quite particular about the fit. Elena unzipped the first bag to find an exquisitely tailored suit. These don't look like they need alterations. Janet smiled thinly. Mr. Reed recently lost weight. He finds his current wardrobe lacking. Elena nodded, though she suspected the alterations were merely a pretext. When does he need them? No rush. Next week is fine. Janet handed her a business card. Call me directly when they're ready. I'll handle the pickup. After Janet left, Elena examined the garments one by one. The suit was indeed slightly large, though not enough to warrant alteration under normal circumstances. The second bag contained 2 cashmere sweaters with minimal wear, and the third held a vintage smoking jacket that seemed at odds with Alexander's severe modern style. She turned the jacket over in her hands, admiring the craftsmanship. The silk lining had been repaired multiple times, evidence of long wear and care. Inside the collar, nearly hidden in the seam, she found a monogram, WTR, not Alexander's initials. Elena wrote them down, adding them to her growing collection of clues. The jacket was at least 30 years old, judging by the cut and materials. It might have belonged to Alexander's father. Over the next few days, she worked on the alterations, examining each garment for hints about their owner. The suit yielded, little expensive but unremarkable, like armor Alexander wore to face the world. The sweaters were different. One had a small hole mended near the cuff, not professionally but with obvious care. The other had worn elbow patches that had been replaced multiple times rather than the sweater being discarded. Alexander Reed might project wealth and indifference, but he kept these old garments for reasons beyond practicality. Each time Janet came to check on the progress, Elena attempted casual conversation. How long have you worked for Mr. Reed? 15 years this April, Janet replied, inspecting the alterations with a critical eye. He must be a demanding boss. Janet's expression softened slightly. He expects excellence, but he's fair and generous. In his way. In his way. Mr. Reed doesn't advertise his charitable works, but they're substantial. Janet straightened, professional reserve returning. These look satisfactory. I'll let him know they'll be ready on schedule. Elena worked late into the evening, her mind churning with questions. The monogrammed smoking jacket WTR had to be William Thomas Reed, Alexander's father, the man who had employed her grandmother. The man who, according to Alexander, had been involved with her. As she carefully adjusted the lining of the smoking jacket, she noticed a loose thread in the inner pocket. Investigating further, she discovered a small tarrant behind it, something hard. With careful fingers, she extracted a small tarnished key. Elena turned it over in her palm. An old-fashioned door key, the kind that might open a private office, or a safe deposit box. She photographed it from several angles before returning it to its hiding place. Another clue though to what? She wasn't sure. When Janet came to collect the finished garments, Elena mentioned the jacket. Its beautiful craftsmanship, vintage. Yes, it belonged to Mr. Reed's father. Alexander rarely wears it, but he won't part with it. The initials inside WTR. Janet looked surprised. You have a good eye. William Thomas Reed. Alexander's father passed away 12 years ago. What was he like? Elena asked, trying to sound merely curious. Janet hesitated. I only met him a few times. He was formidable. Alexander resembles him physically, but they were very different men. She gathered the garment bags. Mr. Reed was pleased with your work. He asked me to give you this. She handed Elena an envelope. Inside was a check for 3 times the agreed amount. He's also wondering if you'd be willing to take on some additional projects. His entire wardrobe needs evaluation. Elena nodded, recognizing the opportunity for what it was, not just income, but access. Of course, excellent. I'll be in touch. Janet paused at the door. He speaks highly of your craftsmanship, Ms. Vasquez. That's rare for Alexander. After Janet left, Elena stared at the check, wondering what game Alexander Reed was playing. He had been cold, even cruel during their dinner, clearly wanting to end her inquiries about her grandmother. Yet now he was ensuring their connection would continue. Perhaps he was simply monitoring her, keeping her close to prevent her from digging too deeply into the past. Or perhaps, and this thought gave her pause, perhaps Alexander was as hungry for answers as she was, but couldn't admit it even to himself. She folded the check and placed it in her cash box. Whatever his motives, Alexander Reed had just ensured their paths would continue to cross. And with each crossing, Elena was determined to unravel more threads of the mystery that connected them. A week later, Janet called with an unusual request. Mr. Reed needs a button replaced on his dinner jacket immediately. He has an event tonight and his regular valet is ill. Could you come to his penthouse? Elena hesitated. Entering Alexander's private space felt like crossing a boundary, but she couldn't deny her curiosity. I can be there in an hour. The penthouse occupied the top floor of a sleek residential tower with views spanning the entire city. A uniformed doorman escorted Elena to a private elevator that required a key card to operate. Mr. Reed is expecting you, he said, swiping his card and stepping back. The elevator opened directly into a vast living area, minimalist in design, with stark white walls and sparse expensive furniture. Floor-tisseling windows showcased the city spread out below like a carpet of lights in the gathering dusk. Mr. Reed will be back shortly. He's on a call. The voice came from a small silver-haired woman who emerged from a hallway. I'm Mariana. I manage the household. Elena introduced herself, taking in the older woman's neat appearance and direct gaze. The jacket is this way, Mariana said, leading Elena to a dressing room larger than her entire apartment. A black dinner jacket hung on a valet stand. The second button is loose. Mr. Reed noticed it just before his shower. Elena examined the jacket. The button was indeed loose. A quick 5-minute repair. I'll have this fixed right away. Mariana nodded and left Elena to her work. When she returned a few minutes later with a cup of tea, Elena had already completed the repair. That was fast, Mariana observed, handing Elena the tea. Mr. Reed's call is running long. Please, sit for a moment. Elena accepted the tea and followed. Mariana too, a small breakfast nook off the kitchen, noticeably warmer and more lived-in than the sterile main rooms. How long have you worked for Mr. Reed? Elena asked. 32 years, Mariana replied. I worked for his parents first, then stayed with Alexander after they passed. Elena nearly choked on her tea. You worked for the Reed family in the 1970s. Mariana's eyes narrowed slightly. Yes. Why do you ask? Elena set down her cup. My grandmother worked for them to Carmen Vasquez. The color drained from Mariana's face. And Dios mío, she whispered. You're Isabella's granddaughter. You knew her? Elena breathed. Mariana glanced toward the hallway, then leaned closer. Alexander told me about your visit to his office, about your questions. Did you know her well? We worked together for years. Mariana's eyes grew distant. She was my friend. Do you know what happened to her? Why she disappeared? Mariana's expression closed. That is not my story to tell. Please, Elena pressed. My mother was left alone. We never knew some secrets are buried for a reason. Nina? Mariana stood abruptly. I've said too much already. Did Mr. Reed, William Reed, have something to do with her disappearance? Mariana's face tightened. The past is full of ghosts. Some are better left undisturbed. She was my grandmother, Elena insisted. I have a right to know. Rights? Mariana's laugh was bitter. In this house, rights have always belonged to those with power. Remember that. Before Elena could respond, they heard the elevator doors open. That will be Alexander, Mariana said, her manner shifting back to professional detachment. Up. Tell him you've finished with the jacket. Elena followed her back to the main living area, where Alexander stood examining his phone. Still in a bathrobe from his shower, hair damp. Ah, Ms. Vasquez, he said without looking up. Thank you for coming on such short notice. The repair is complete, Elena replied, studying him in this unguarded moment. Without his armor of tailored suits and cold formality, he seemed almost human. He glanced up, catching her observation. Something flickered across his face, discomfort at being seen in this state, perhaps. Excellent. I'll change now. Mariana will see you out. He disappeared down the hallway, but Elena made no move. To leave? You've known him since he was a child, she said to Mariana. The older woman nodded. Since he was 5 years old? What was he like before my grandmother disappeared? Mariana's expression softened. Different. He smiled more, talked more. She sighed. Children absorb the pain in a household even when adults think they're protected from it. And after she left, everything changed. William began drinking heavily. Victor's mother became even more bitter. And Alexander, she shook her head. He learned to hide himself away, to build walls. He said my grandmother just left, but I don't believe it, Elena said quietly. Mariana's eyes met hers, something unspoken passing between them. Trust your instincts, Nina, but be careful. The Reed family history is complicated. I'm not afraid of complicated. Perhaps you should be. Mariana reached out, briefly touching Elena's hand. You have her eyes, you know, and her spirit. The sound of a door opening interrupted them. Alexander emerged in his dinner jacket, impeccably dressed once more. Still here, Ms. Vasquez? We were just chatting, Mariana said smoothly. I was telling Elena about the art collection. Alexander's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded. Mariana is one of the few who appreciates it properly. He checked his watch. I'm afraid I must leave for my event. Thank you again for the timely repair. Elena gathered her things, but as she headed toward the elevator, Alexander surprised her. Ms. Vasquez. She turned. My Christmas party is next Saturday. Business associates, clients, black tie. He seemed almost uncomfortable. Your skills might be useful if any emergency alterations are needed. Janet will send you the details. Before Lena could respond, the elevator doors opened, and she found herself descending to the lobby, mind racing with the implications of what had just transpired. An invitation to Alexander Reed's home, not as a service provider slipping in through the back, but as a guest, of sorts. And more importantly, another encounter with Mariana, who clearly knew far more about Carmen Vasquez than she was willing to say. The following Sunday, Elena took the bus to her mother's small apartment in the suburbs. She found Luisa Vasquez in the kitchen, preparing tamales for the upcoming holidays. Mama, we need to talk about Abuela. Luisa's hands stilled over the masa. Why this sudden interest in the past? Elena pulled out her phone and showed her mother the photograph of Carmen. Because I found this in the coat of a man named Alexander Reed. Luisa gasped, sinking into a chair. Where did you get this? His father was William Reed. Abuela worked for their family before she disappeared. Elena sat across from her mother. Why didn't you ever tell me? Luisa's eyes filled with tears. What good would it have done, dredging up old pain? What pain, Mama? What really happened? Luisa wiped her hands on her apron, her expression haunted. I was 16, when Mama disappeared. She had been working for the Reed family for years, good money that paid for my schooling, our apartment. Was she having an affair with William Reed? Luisa flinched. Who told you that? Alexander Reed. His son Alexander. Luisa shook her head. Such a serious little boy. Always watching, always listening. She sighed deeply. Yes, William and my mother were involved. Victoria Reed knew maid. Sure, everyone knew she knew. It was her way of controlling both of them, and then Abuela just vanished. Without saying goodbye to you. One night she didn't come home. Luisa's voice grew distant. I waited up all night, called the Reed house in the morning, but Victoria answered, said Mama had quit, packed her things, abandoned her post. You didn't believe that? Never. Luisa's eyes flashed with decades-old anger. My mother would never leave me. Never. What did you do? What could I do? I was a teenage immigrant with broken English. I went to the Reed house, demanded to speak. With William, Victoria had me thrown out, threatened to call immigration. Luisa's hands trembled. A week later, an envelope arrived with 3 months' wages and a note in my mother's handwriting. Forgive me, you think she was forced to write it? I don't know what to think. For years I waited for her to contact me, to explain. Luisa's eyes filled with tears. I filed police reports. Hired a private investigator when I could finally afford one. Years later, nothing. Elena reached for her mother's hand. Alexander said she just left, like everyone else in his father's life. But Mariana, their housekeeper, she hinted there was more to the story. Mariana. Luisa nodded. I remember her. She was kind to me when I came looking for Mama, snuck me food from the kitchen while Victoria was screaming at me to leave. She's still working for Alexander. She recognized me, said I have Abuela's eyes. Her spirit. Luisa smiled sadly. You do, so determined. She squeezed Elena's hand. Be careful, Mia. The Reeds are powerful people. Alexander has invited me to his Christmas party. Luisa's eyes widened. Why? Officially, to be on hand for emergency alterations. Unofficially, Elena shrugged. I think he's curious about me, about my connection to his past. Or he wants to keep an eye on you. Make sure you don't cause trouble. Maybe. Elena paused. I need to know what happened to her. Mama? Not just for us, but for Abuela. Someone knows the truth. Luisa was quiet for a long moment. There's something I've never shown you. She rose and went to her bedroom, returning with a small wooden box. After the private investigator failed, I gave up hope of finding answers. But I kept these. She opened the box. Inside were a handful of letters, their paper yellowed with age. From Mama to my father in Mexico, before I came to America. She wrote to him every week until he died, even though they were separated. Luisa handed one to Elena. Read this one. From 1974, Elena carefully unfolded the delicate paper, recognizing a few phrases in her grandmother's elegant script, despite her limited Spanish. What does it say? Luisa pointed to a paragraph. Here, she writes about being afraid, about William's temper when he drinks, about Victoria's threats. She traced another line with her finger, and here she mentions El Secreto, the secret. Something she says could destroy the Reed family if revealed. Elena looked up. What secret? She never said explicitly. But in this letter, from a month before she disappeared, she writes that she's considering going to the police. Louisa's voice broke. She was planning something, Elena, and then she vanished. Elena reread the letter, a chill running through her. Do you think William Reed had something to do with her disappearance? I've wondered that for 40 years. Louisa carefully returned the letters to the box. William Reed died before I could confront him as an adult, and now you've found his son. I'm going to that Christmas party, Elena said with determination. I'm going to find out what happened to a boy. Be careful, Louisa warned again. The rich protect their own. Always. Across town, in his office at Reed Enterprises, Alexander sat reviewing a file that hadn't been opened in years. His private investigator had worked quickly, compiling everything available on Elena Vasquez and her family. Elena, 32, unmarried, trained at the Fashion Institute before opening her small shop 5 years ago. Good reputation, modest success. No criminal record, excellent credit, despite occasional financial struggles. Luisa Vasquez, 64, retired elementary school teacher, widowed, raised Elena alone after her husband's death when Elena was 10, and Carmen Isabella Vasquez, employed by the Reed family from 1968 to 1975, emigrated legally from Mexico. In 1966, disappeared October 17, 1975. Missing persons report filed by daughter Louisa, but investigation yielded nothing. The official story, the one his mother had insisted upon, the one the family lawyer had reinforced, was that Carmen had simply left, taken her final paycheck, and disappeared. Perhaps returned to Mexico, perhaps moved to another state. People vanished all the time, they said, especially people like her. But Alexander had been 7 years old, with a child's capacity for truth. He remembered the shouting from his father's study the night before Carmen disappeared, his mother's cold smile the next morning, the whispered conversations that stopped whenever he entered a room. He closed the file, troubled by memories he'd spent decades suppressing. Why had he invited Elena Vasquez to his Christmas party? To monitor her inquiries, to appease his own curiosity, or because when he looked at her, he saw echoes of the only adult who had shown him real kindness in his childhood? Whatever his reasons, he had set something in motion that might not be easily stopped. Elena's phone rang just after midnight. Her mother's neighbor, frantic. Louisa collapsed. The ambulance is taking her to Metropolitan General. The emergency room was chaos, crying children, moaning adults, harried staff. Elena found her mother in a curtained bay, hooked to monitors, her normally vibrant face ashen. Mama? Elena whispered, taking air. Louisa's eyes fluttered open. Just a little dizzy spell. Nothing to worry about. The doctor told a different story. Elevated blood pressure, irregular heartbeat. We need to run tests. She'll stay overnight. For observation, Elena settled into the uncomfortable chair beside her mother's bed, watching the monitors blink, listening to the steady beep that marked Louisa's heartbeat. Around 3 a.m., a nurse gently suggested she go home and rest. We have your number. We'll call if anything changes. Elena reluctantly agreed, promising her sleeping mother she'd return first thing in the morning. In the hospital lobby, she checked her phone. 3 missed calls from an unknown number. As she was about to put it away, it rang again. Hello, Ms. Vasquez. It's Janet Winters, Alexander Reed's assistant. Elena frowned. It's the middle of the night. Ms. Winters, I apologize for the hour. Mr. Reed asked me to contact you regarding your mother. Elena froze. How do you know about my mother? Mr. Reed has ... connections at Metropolitan General. He's on the board. He was notified when your mother was admitted. Why would he care? A pause. He didn't say. He simply instructed me to tell you that your mother has been moved to a private room and the hospital's chief cardiologist will see her in the morning. Elena's exhaustion gave way to anger. He had no right to interfere. Ms. Vasquez, he was trying to help. I don't need his help or his charity. Janet's voice cooled. Shall I tell Mr. Reed you prefer your mother remain in the general ward? Elena closed her eyes, caught between pride and practicality. A private room, the chief cardiologist for her mother. No, she said finally. Tell Mr. Reed. Thank you, but I want to know why he's doing this. You can ask him yourself. He's here, at the hospital now. In the cafeteria, 4th floor. Elena found him sitting alone in the deserted cafeteria, an untouched cup of coffee before him, scrolling through emails on his phone. He wore casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater, different from his usual corporate armor, that she almost didn't recognize him. Mr. Reed. He looked up, slipping his phone into his pocket. Ms. Vasquez. Please. Sit. Elena remained standing. Why are you involving yourself in my mother's medical care? I heard about her admission. I made a call. That doesn't answer my question. Alexander gestured to the chair again. Please. Elena reluctantly sat. How is she? He asked. Stable. They're running tests. Elena studied his face, searching for his motivation. Why do you care? Alexander's expression remained unreadable. Your mother was 16 when Carmen disappeared, the same age I was when my father died. So this is what guilt, penance. This is a simple courtesy, nothing more. he pushed the coffee aside. Despite what you may think of me, Miss Vasquez, I'm not a monster. I never said you were. You didn't have to. His eyes met hers. I recognize the way you look at me, like I'm responsible for every hardship your family has endured. Elena looked away. I don't blame you for what happened before you were born, don't you? His voice held no accusation, just a weary certainty. You came to my office convinced I was hiding something about your grandmother, that I'm part of some decades-old conspiracy. Are you Alexander sighed? I was 7 years old when Carmen vanished. Whatever happened, I was a child. But you know something, I can see it in your face whenever we speak of her. Alexander was silent for a long moment. I have ... impressions, fragments of memories, nothing concrete. Tell me, he hesitated, then said, I remember the night before she disappeared, shouting from my father's study. My mother's voice, then Carmen's. Later, my father drinking heavily in the library, and the next day, Carmen was gone. My mother said she'd quit, returned to Mexico. My father, Alexander's expression darkened. He didn't speak for days. Began drinking even more heavily. When I asked about Carmen, he told me to never mention her name again. You don't believe she just left? Alexander met her gaze directly. I don't know what to believe. It was nearly 50 years ago, and the principal players are all dead now. Not all of them. Mariana was there. My mother, you fragments and impressions, he repeated, not evidence. They sat in silence for a moment. The fluorescent lights humming overhead, the hospital's night sounds distant and muffled. The Christmas party, Elena said suddenly. You didn't invite me for alterations. A ghost of a smile touched Alexander's lips. No. Then why? Perhaps I'm tired of fragments. Perhaps I want to know the truth as much as you do. He stood. Your mother will receive excellent care here. Dr. Mendez is the best cardiologist in the state. I can't afford, it's taken care of. Elena stood as well, anger flaring again. I don't want your money. It's not charity, Miss Vasquez. Consider it in advance. Alexander headed for the door, then paused. The development project. I'm overseeing the one that will eventually demolish your shop. Building it requires extensive wardrobe modifications for the project team. Uniforms, protective gear, a substantial contract. Elena blinked, caught off guard. You're offering me a job? A business opportunity? Your skills are exceptional. It would be wasteful not to utilize them. He glanced at his watch. I have an early meeting. Please give your mother my regards. Alexander, Elena called as he reached the door. He turned, surprised by her use of his first name. Thank you, for my mother. He nodded once, then disappeared into the hospital corridor, leaving Elena to wonder yet again what game they were playing and who was truly controlling the moves. Luisa was released from the hospital 3 days later with medication for her heart and strict instructions to rest. Elena moved temporarily into her mother's apartment to help, setting up a small sewing station in the living room to keep up with her work. You don't have to babysit me, Luisa protested on the 4th day. I'm perfectly capable of taking my own pills. Humor me, Elena said, measuring fabric for a client's dress. Besides, I like being here. Luisa watched her daughter work, fingers flying over the material with practiced precision. You've spoken with Alexander Reed again. It wasn't a question. Elena paused, needle in midair. Yes, at the hospital, and he arranged for your private room. The specialist. Luisa's expression hardened. I don't want Reed charity. That's what I told him. Elena resumed stitching. He says it's not charity. He's offering me a contract uniforms for his development project. The same project that will destroy your shop. Luisa shook her head. Convenient. I think he's trying to make amends, in his way. For what? He was a child when Carmen disappeared. Elena set her sewing aside. I think he knows more than he's saying, or suspects more. He's invited me to his Christmas party, and you're going again. Not a question. I have to, Mama. This may be my only chance to learn what happened to Abuela. Luisa sighed deeply. The past has sharp edges. Mia, be careful you don't cut yourself open searching for it. The night of the party arrived, cold and clear, stars visible even through the city's light pollution. Elena stood before her mirror, examining her appearance critically. She'd made the dress herself, deep burgundy velvet, with a modest neckline, but a daring back. The fabric salvaged from a vintage gown she'd found at a thrift store. Simple, elegant, and entirely her own. She'd declined Janet's offer of a car, preferring to take a taxi to maintain her independence. The Reed penthouse was transformed when she arrived. Subtle lighting, tasteful decorations, a small orchestra playing in one corner. 50 or 60 people mingled, drinking champagne and making the careful conversation of those who have power and wish to keep it. Janet met her at the elevator. Elena, you look lovely. Thank you. Is there somewhere I should set up for alterations? Janet smiled. Alexander was explicit that you're here as a guest, not staff. Though he did ask that you bring your emergency kit, just in case. She led Elena through the crowd, introducing her as the brilliant tailor who saved Alexander from a wardrobe disaster. People nodded politely, their eyes already sliding past her to identify more important guests. Alexander was deep in conversation with an elderly man when Janine approached him. He looked up, his customary stern expression softening almost imperceptibly when he saw Elena. Ms. Vasquez, welcome, he turned to his companion. Senator, this is Elena Vasquez, the finest tailor in the city. The senator shook her hand. Any friend of Alexander's is a friend of mine. Friend. The word hung strangely in the air between them. Ms. Vasquez and I have a historical connection, Alexander said, his eyes meeting Elena. Our families knew each other many years ago. How interesting, the senator replied without interest. If you'll excuse me, I see the mayor has arrived. When he'd gone, Alexander offered Elena a glass of champagne from a passing tray. You look beautiful. The compliment, delivered in his usual direct manner, caught her off guard. Thank you. My mother is doing well. I should have said that first. I'm glad to hear it. He glanced around at his guests. This must seem rather ostentatious to you. It's exactly what I expected. A hint of a smile touched his lips. Predictable. Am I in some ways? Elena sipped her champagne. Why am I really here, Alexander? Before he could answer, they were interrupted by a striking woman in her 60s, expensively dressed and immaculately preserved by the best cosmetic surgeon's money could buy. Alexander, darling, you've been holding out on me? She assessed Elena with calculating eyes. Aren't you going to introduce us? Catherine, this is Elena Vasquez. Elena Catherine Westmore, an old family friend. Catherine's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. Vasquez, not related to that housekeeper your father was so fond of. Elena felt Alexander tense beside her. Carmen Vasquez was my grandmother. Well, Catherine's smile was a predator's. How fascinating. History does have a way of repeating itself, doesn't it, Alexander? If you'll excuse us, Alexander said coldly, placing his hand lightly on Elena's back to guide her away. I promised to introduce Elena to Mariana. As they moved through the crowd, Elena felt the slight tremor in Alexander's hand against her back. Who was that woman? My mother's oldest friend. She's known me since I was born. His voice was tight. I apologize for her. Implication. That history is repeating itself. That I'm involved with you like my grandmother was with your father. Alexander stopped, turning to face her. Catherine delights in creating discomfort. It's how she's entertained herself for 70 years, but she knew my grandmother. Everyone in my parents' circle knew about Carmen. My mother made sure of that. Bitterness edged his voice. It was her way of punishing my father and Carmen. Public humiliation disguised as sophisticated tolerance. A waiter approached with more champagne. Alexander waved him away and checked his watch. The caterer needs me for a moment. Please, enjoy yourself. I'll find you later. Elena watched him go, noting how people adjusted their posture as he passed, how conversations paused and resumed. Alexander Reed carried his power like a second skin. He's not used to it, you know? Elena turned to find Mariana beside her, elegant in a simple black dress. Used to what? Wanting something he can't simply acquire? Mariana nodded, toward Alexander's retreating figure. He's been watching the door since you arrived. I doubt Alexander Reed wants anything from me. Mariana's smile was knowing. Donte beso sure, niña. She linked her arm through Elena's cum. The party is too crowded. Let me show you something. She led Elena down a hallway to a small study room, mahogany and leather, so different from the minimalist aesthetic of the main rooms. This was William's private study in the old house. When they tore it down to build this tower, Alexander had the entire room recreated, piece by piece. Elena looked around at the bookshelves, the heavy desk, the leather chairs worn with use. Why would he preserve his father's space so exactly? To understand him, perhaps, or to exercise him. Mariana ran her hand along the desk's edge. We all carry our ghosts, Elena, some more heavily than others. On the desk sat a framed photograph of much younger Alexander, in graduation robes, standing stiffly beside a distinguished-looking man with the same sharp features and cold eyes. William, Elena murmured. Yes. The last photograph taken of them, together, 3 months later, William was dead. Heart attack. Mariana's voice softened. Alexander found him, right here in this room. Or rather, the original of this room. I'm sorry. William Reed was not an easy man to love. But Alexander tried. God, how that boy tried. Mariana turned to face Elena. Be gentle with him. He's not as strong as he pretends to be. Before Elena could respond, the study door opened and Alexander himself appeared, his expression shifting from surprise to something unreadable when he saw them. Mariana, Elena, I've been looking for you. I was just showing Elena your father's study, Mariana said calmly. Alexander's eyes moved from the older woman to Elena, then to the photograph on the desk. The party is missing its hostess. Mariana? Mariana nodded, recognizing the dismissal. She squeezed Elena's hand before leaving them alone. Alexander remained in the doorway, as if reluctant to enter the space with Elena there. I apologize for Catherine's remarks. You already apologized, did I? He crossed to a cabinet, withdrawing a decanter of amber liquid. Scotch. Elena shook her head. Alexander poured himself a measure, his back to her. Your grandmother worked for my family for 7 years, he said, still facing away. In that time, she was never invited to a party. Never treated as a guest? She entered through the service entrance, ate in the kitchen, lived in a room the size of my current closet. He turned, meeting Elena's gaze. Yet here you are, in my home, wearing a dress you made yourself that puts every designer gown out there. To shame, is that why you invited me? To right some historical wrong. I invited you because I wanted you here. The simple honesty in his voice caught her off guard. The rest of them business associates, political connections, social obligations, but you, He set down his untouched scotch. I actually wanted to see. The admission hung in the air between them, surprising them both. Alexander, we should rejoin the party, he said abruptly. People will talk. Let them, Elena said softly. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, the walls came down. Then he offered his arm, formal once more. Shall we? The party continued well past midnight, but Elena hardly noticed the time. Alexander remained by her side after they left the study, introducing her to people whose names she immediately forgot, his hand occasionally brushing against her lower back as they navigated the crowd. Near 1 o'clock, as guests began to depart, Alexander leaned close to her ear. Stay, there's something I want to show you. By 1:30, only Mariana remained, efficiently directing the catering staff in their cleanup. Elena stood by the windows, watching the city lights, aware of Alexander, speaking quietly with Mariana near the kitchen. Their conversation seemed intense, with Mariana shaking her head several times before finally sighing and nodding in apparent resignation. Alexander approached Elena with 2 cups of coffee. The staff will be gone soon? I should go too. It's late, please. Just a little longer. There was something in his voice of vulnerability she hadn't heard before that made her accept the coffee and stay. When the last of the staff departed, Mariana joined them in the living room. Alexander had removed his tie and suit jacket, and Mariana had exchanged her heels for comfortable slippers. The formality of the evening had dissolved. Sit, Elena, Mariana said, gesturing to the sofa. It's time we talked properly. Elena sat, setting her coffee aside. About my grandmother? Yes. Alexander took a seat across from her, his posture tense. Mariana has agreed to tell us what she knows. Us? Elena looked between them. You don't? No either. I know fragments, Alexander said. Pieces overheard as a child. Nothing coherent. Mariana settled into an armchair, smoothing her skirt with gnarled hands. I've kept this secret for nearly 50 years. First out of fear, then out of habit. She looked directly at Elena. Your grandmother was my closest friend. We came to this country around the same time, me from Puerto Rico, her from Mexico, both of us working for wealthy families. How did she come to work for the Reeds? Elena asked. William hired her away from another family. Offered double the salary. Mariana's expression darkened. Victoria Alexander's mother was furious, but William insisted. Said Carmen had excellent references. She did, Alexander interjected. I found them in my father's papers after he died, along with other documents. What documents? Elena asked. Alexander nodded to Mariana to continue her story. Carmen was beautiful, intelligent, hardworking. William noticed immediately. Victoria noticed him noticing. Mariana sighed. It was a slow courtship, if you could call it that. Small kindnesses. From William extra money, gifts for Carmen's daughter, your mother. Eventually, they began an affair. How long did it last? Years. William was infatuated. Talked of divorce? Of marrying Carmen? Mariana glanced at Alexander. Victoria would never have allowed it, of course. The scandal, the social suicide. And, my grandmother, did she want to marry him? Mariana hesitated. Carmen was practical. She wanted security for herself and Louisa. A better life. William promised many things. But something went wrong, Elena prompted. In the summer of 1975, Carmen became distant, worried. She and William argued frequently. Mariana twisted her hands in her lap. One night she came to my room in tears. Said she'd discovered something that could destroy the Reed family. Elena leaned forward. What was it? She wouldn't tell me details. Said it was safer if I didn't know. Mariana's eyes filled with tears. The next morning, she was gone. Her room emptied. Victoria said she'd quit, returned to Mexico. But you didn't believe that. Never. Mariana wiped her eyes. Carmen would never have left without saying goodbye to me. And never, ever would she have abandoned Louisa. Alexander stood abruptly, crossing to a sideboard where he poured himself a scotch with an unsteady hand. Tell her the rest, Mariana. Mariana looked at him for a long moment, then back to Elena. A week after Carmen disappeared, I was cleaning William's study. I found blood drops of it behind his desk. On the corner of the rug, her voice dropped to a whisper. It had been recently shampooed, but not well enough. Elena felt a chill run through her. You think he hurt her? Killed her? I don't know, Mariana admitted. William was drinking heavily in those days. He had a temper. If Carmen threatened him with whatever she'd discovered, what did you do? Elena asked. Nothing, Mariana said, shame evident in her voice. I was afraid, alone in a foreign country. No one would have believed me. Over William Reed. Alexander drained his glass. You should have told me. When I was older, after he died. And what good would it have done? Mariana asked gently. Revive old scandals. Destroy what remained of your family name. I deserved to know the truth about my father. Alexander's voice was tight with anger. About what happened in that house. You were a child, Mariana said. I wanted to protect you. From the knowledge that my father might have been a murderer. Alexander laughed bitterly. I've suspected it since I was 10 years old. Elena watched this exchange with growing understanding. Alexander's coldness, his isolation, they weren't simply personality traits. They were armor, protection against a truth he'd always feared but never confirmed. The documents you mentioned, she said quietly. The ones you found after your father died. What were they? Alexander set down his empty glass. Financial records. Regular payments to an account in Mexico, starting a month after Carmen disappeared, continuing until my father's death. Blackmail, Elena suggested, or guilt money, Mariana murmured. Compensation to someone, not to my mother, Elena said. She never received any money from William Reed. Alexander crossed to his desk, unlocking a drawer and withdrawing a file. The payments went to a woman named Isabella Diaz in Mexico City. He handed Elena a document. I hired investigators over the years. They never found her. Elena stared at the paper, a photocopy of an old bank record. Isabella was my grandmother's middle name. I know, Alexander said. But if she was alive, receiving these payments, why did she never contact your mother? Lest she couldn't, Elena said slowly. Lest she was being kept somewhere. Controlled somehow. Mariana shook her head. After so many years. Ma'am, I always said Abuela would never have abandoned her willingly. Elena looked up at Alexander. Your father could have arranged something, institutionalization, a private facility, somewhere she couldn't leave, couldn't communicate. That's quite an accusation, Alexander said, but his tone lacked conviction. Is it really so hard to believe? A powerful man silencing someone who threatened him. Elena stood, suddenly energized. These payments continued until 2013 when your father died. If my grandmother was still alive then, she could still be alive now, Alexander finished. In her 80s, but possibly alive. The three of them fell silent, absorbing the implications. I need to see the complete records, Elena said finally. The account information, the institution receiving the payments, everything your father left. Alexander hesitated, then nodded. I have more files at the office. Financial records, correspondence. I'll gather everything. I'll help, Mariana said, rising from her chair. There may be clues in what he kept, what he saved. Elena looked between them, the housekeeper who had kept secrets for decades out of fear and loyalty, and the son who had built his life around avoiding his father's shadow. Both of them now allies in her search. If she's alive, Elena said softly, I'm going to find her. Alexander met her gaze, and for the first time since they'd met, his eyes held neither coldness nor calculation, only a shared determination. We'll find her, he corrected, together. The following evening, Elena and her mother sat at Alexander's dining table, surrounded by folders, photographs, and yellowed papers. Mariana had prepared dinner, moving quietly around them as they sifted through the remnants of William Reed's secret life. These are the payment records, Alexander said, sliding a folder toward Luisa. Quarterly deposits to an account at Banco Nacional de Mexico, in the name of Isabella Diaz. Luisa's hands trembled as she opened the folder. For 38 years, without fail, my father was meticulous about financial obligations, Alexander said, his tone neutral. Elena examined a stack of photographs, formal portraits of the Reed family through the years. William and Victoria, cold and proper, with Alexander growing, from a solemn child to a reserved teenager between them. No genuine smiles, no warmth. Wait, she said, pausing at a photo from what appeared to be a garden party. In the background, barely visible, stood her grandmother in a maid's uniform, watching a young Alexander. Look at how she's looking at you. Alexander took the photo, studying it. I remember this day, my 8th birthday. Father insisted on a party, though I hated them. Carmen made me a special cake when the guests left. His voice softened with the memory. Chocolate with cinnamon, a secret Mexican recipe, she told me. Luisa looked up sharply. That was her grandmother's recipe. She made it for my birthdays too. A current of understanding passed between Alexander and Luisa, the shared experience of being children cherished by the same woman, decades apart. Mariana set a pot of coffee on the table. Carmen loved you, Alexander. Like another son? Another? Elena asked. Mariana froze, her eyes darting to Alexander. It's time for the truth, Mariana, he said quietly. All of it. The older woman sank into a chair, suddenly looking her age. Carmen had another child, a son, born in 1969. Elena stared at her in shock. That's impossible. Mama would have known if she had a brother. Half-brother, Alexander corrected, his voice flat. My father's child. The silence that followed was absolute. Luisa's face had gone pale, her fingers white-knuckled around the edge of the table. William got Carmen pregnant. Elena finally managed. Mariana nodded. Victoria discovered the pregnancy before Carmen could tell William. She was cruel. Gave Carmen a choice, give up the baby or lose her job. So Carmen gave the baby up for adoption, Elena said. No. Mariana glanced at Alexander, who nodded for her to continue. Victoria arranged everything. The child was born in a private clinic. Carmen was allowed 2 days with him. Then Victoria took him away. To where, Louisa asked, finding her voice at last. To a family of Victoria's choosing, a childless couple, who worked for Reed Enterprises, distant enough to keep the secret, close enough to monitor. Mariana looked directly at Alexander. Alexander's expression remained carefully neutral. James and Eleanor Caldwell. James was my father's financial advisor. They raised the boy as their own, named him Michael. You knew him, Elena asked. He was a few years ahead of me at boarding school. We were, acquaintances, not friends. Alexander's mouth twisted. Victoria made sure of that. She didn't want us forming any brotherly bond. Doth he know? Louisa pressed. This Michael, doth he know about his birth mother? I don't believe so, Alexander replied. The Caldwells moved to London when I was 16, after my father died. I found documents in his safe, legal papers arranging the private adoption. Medical records of the birth, photographs of Michael as a child that my father had kept hidden, and Carmen, Elena asked. She never saw her son again. Victoria forbade it. Mariana said, wiping away tears. Said she would fire Carmen, report her as an illegal immigrant if she ever tried to contact the boy. But Carmen found ways. She volunteered at his preschool 1 day a week, attended his Little League games, pretending to be there for another child. This is why she wouldn't leave, Louisa whispered. Even when William became dangerous, she couldn't bear to be separated from her son. Alexander stood abruptly, crossing to the window. In the summer of 1975, Michael broke his arm, falling from a tree. Carmen went to the hospital. A nurse, seeing her distress, assumed she was his mother and allowed her into his room. Victoria found out what happened. Elena asked, though she feared she already knew. Victoria threatened to tell Michael everything, how his real mother was the family maid, how he was illegitimate, a scandal. Alexander's voice hardened. She knew it would devastate him. He was only 6 years old. That's monstrous, Elena whispered. That was my mother. Alexander turned back to them. 2 days later, Carmen confronted my father. I overheard part of their argument. She was threatening to go public with the truth about Michael, about Victoria's blackmail. She said she had proof. Proof of what? Louisa asked. I don't know. I was sent to my room. Alexander's expression darkened. The next morning, Carmen was gone. Victoria said she'd quit. My father said nothing at all. Elena looked at the scattered documents on the table, the evidence of decades of secrets and lies. And Michael, what happened to him? He grew up, attended Oxford, became an architect, lives in London still, as far as I know. Alexander picked up a more recent photograph from the table and handed it to Elena. This is him, 5 years ago at a charity event in London. Elena studied the photograph of a distinguished-looking man. In his early 50s, he had William's height and bearing, but something in the shape of his eyes, the curve of his smile, was unmistakably Carmen. My uncle, she said softly, passing the photo to her mother. Louisa took it with trembling hands. He has her eyes. She looked up at Alexander. Does he know about any of this? That William was his father? I don't believe so. The Caldwells were devoted parents. They never told him he was adopted, as far as I know. He has a right to know the truth, Louisa said firmly, about his birth, about his mother. And if knowing destroys the life he's built, Alexander challenged, a family he believes is his. Secrets destroyed our families, Elena said quietly. Yours and mine. Lies and silence and shame. She met Alexander's gaze. Truth might hurt, but secrets kill. Alexander held her eyes for a long moment, then nodded. I'll contact him. Arrange a meeting, and my mother, Louisa asked, her voice breaking. If she's alive, if all these payments were supporting her somewhere, how do we find her? Alexander gathered the financial records, his expression determined. We follow the money. Every transaction leaves a trail. If Carmen is alive, these payments will lead us to her, and if she's not? Elena asked the question they'd all been avoiding. Then we find out what happened to her, Alexander replied, his tone leaving no room for argument, and who was responsible. The unspoken accusation hung in the air. William Reed, his father, the man whose blood ran in his veins, the man whose secrets he'd spent a lifetime trying to escape. It's late, Mariana said gently. You should both stay tonight. We can continue in the morning. As Mariana led Louisa to a guest room, Alexander and Elena remained at the table, surrounded by the paper ghosts of their shared past. I'm sorry, he said finally. For what? For my family. For what they did to yours. Elena reached across the table, hesitantly covering his hand with hers. You aren't responsible for your father's sins. Alexander looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face. Aren't I? I've spent my life building on the foundation he created, profiting from his empire. His voice turned bitter. I even look like him. But you aren't him, Elena said firmly. You're helping us find the truth. That's what matters now. Alexander turned his hand beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. A connection forged from decades of secrets and pain, yet somehow offering comfort to them both. Elena couldn't sleep. The guest room Alexander had given her was luxurious Egyptian cotton sheets, a mattress that seemed to embrace her, but her mind raced with the evening's revelations. A hidden uncle, decades of payments to an account in Mexico, the possibility that her grandmother might still be alive. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and slipped out to the kitchen for water. She found Alexander already there, staring out the window at the city lights, a tumbler of scotch untouched beside him. "Can't sleep either?" she asked softly. He turned unsurprised by her presence. "Too many ghosts?" Elena poured herself water and leaned against the counter. "What will you say to Michael if you meet with him?" "I don't know." Alexander's voice was weary. "How do you tell someone their entire life is built on a lie?" "Not a lie," Elena corrected. "The Caldwells loved him. That was real, and the rest, his birth mother, his true parentage." Alexander shook his head. "Some truths are too heavy to bear. You've borne them, not well." His smile was self-deprecating. "Look at me, Elena. I'm alone, isolated. I've built walls so high I can barely see over them myself." "You let me in," she pointed out. Alexander studied her for a long moment. "Yes, I did." The simple admission hung between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. "Why?" Elena asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Perhaps because you're the first person who looked at me and saw more than my name, my wealth, my power." He picked up his scotch but didn't drink. "You saw the boy who lost Carmen. I saw someone carrying pain they didn't deserve," Elena said quietly. "Like my mother, like me." Alexander set down his glass and stepped closer to her. "What happens when this is over, Elena? When we've uncovered all the secrets? Found all the answers?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Return to my shop, I suppose. Until your development project demolishes it." He flinched. "About that? I've been meaning to tell you." Elena held up a hand. Don't offer to save my shop because of whatever this is between us. I don't want your charity." "It's not charity," Alexander began, but Elena cut him off. "It would be to poison whatever connection we've formed." She met his eyes directly. "I need to succeed or fail on my own terms, Alexander, not because a billionaire decided to rewrite his development plans for me." He studied her face, then nodded slowly. "I understand, do you?" Elena challenged. "Has anyone ever refused your help before?" "No." His lips curved in a slight smile. "It's refreshing." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the intimacy of the late hour and shared confidences creating a bubble around them. "I should try to sleep," Elena said finally. "Tomorrow will be difficult." Alexander nodded. "Good night, Elena." She paused at the doorway. "Alexander, thank you for helping us search for my grandmother." "I'm not doing it for you," he admitted. "I need to know the truth about my father as much as you need to know about Carmen." "I know," Elena said softly. "That's why I trust you." The next morning brought a flurry of activity. Alexander assigned a team of accountants to trace the Mexican bank payments. Luisa contacted her mother's few surviving friends from the 1970s, seeking any overlooked clues. Mariana searched through household records from the Reed estate, looking for anything connected to Carmen. By noon, the first breakthrough came. The payments were routed to a private care facility outside Mexico City, Alexander announced, reviewing the financial team's findings. "La Casa de Descanso, the house of rest." "A nursing home?" Elena asked. "More like a sanitarium. It's special in long-term psychiatric care." Alexander's expression was grim. "It's very exclusive, very private, and expensive," Mariana added, looking over his shoulder at the payment records. "You think my mother is there?" Luisa asked, her voice trembling. "After all these years, I've called them," Alexander said. "They won't confirm or deny having a patient named either Carmen Vasquez or Isabella Diaz. Client confidentiality. We need to go there," Elena said firmly. "See for ourselves." Alexander nodded. "I've already arranged it. My jet can leave this evening." Luisa gasped. "Your private jet? To Mexico?" "It's the fastest way," Alexander said, as if this were entirely normal. "Pack for a few days, we'll leave at 7. Elena pulled him aside while her mother called her doctor to arrange for her heart medication. "We can't accept this, Alexander. A private jet. It's too much." "Do you want to find your grandmother?" he challenged. "Of course, but then let me do this. Not as charity, but as—" he hesitated, searching for the right word. Double quotes, ... "atonement. For my family's actions." Elena studied his face, seeing the determination there. "All right, but only because it's the fastest way. I'll have a car pick you and your mother up at 6. Elena nodded, then remembered something. "The development project. Your company. Can you just leave like this?" Alexander's smile was thin. "Being CEO has its privileges. The project will survive without me for a few days." As Elena turned to leave, Alexander caught her arm gently. "Elena, prepare yourself for what we might find. After 48 years, if Carmen is alive, she'll be an old woman," Elena finished, "possibly unwell. I know, and she might not be there at all," he added quietly. "These payments could have been going to someone else. Or for something else entirely. I know that too." Elena met his gaze steadily. "But I have to try." Alexander nodded, releasing her arm. 6 o'clock. "Don't be late." That afternoon, Elena returned to her shop to pack and check on things before their trip. She was surprised to find a closed for renovations sign on the neighboring storefront, small cafe that had struggled since opening 6 months earlier. Inside her own shop, she gathered essential clothing and her passport, her mind already racing ahead to Mexico. What would they find there? Would her grandmother recognize them if she was alive? What condition would she be in, after decades in an institution? The bell above her door jingled, and Elena looked up, expecting Alexander's driver. Instead, she found Janet Winters standing there, her professional smile firmly in place. "Ms. Vasquez, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Janet? No, I'm just preparing for a trip, yes, to Mexico, with Alexander." Janet's smile never wavered, but her eyes had hardened. "That's actually why I'm here." Elena set down her bag. "Is something wrong?" "That depends on your perspective." Janet removed a folder from her briefcase and placed it on the counter. "Before you leave with Alexander on this quest, there's something you should see." Elena opened the folder to find architectural renderings gleaming high-rises, luxury storefronts, an urban paradise of wealth and consumption. She recognized the neighborhood immediately. Her neighborhood, Reed Enterprises development project, Janet explained unnecessarily. Phase 2 begins next month, not in 6 months, as previously announced. Elena looked up sharply. "What?" "Alexander signed the acceleration order last week. Demolition of this block begins January 15th. Janet's voice was professionally sympathetic. "I thought you should know, since he apparently hasn't told you." Elena stared at the plans. The dates clearly marked, January 15th, barely 3 weeks away. "There must be some mistake," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, doubt crept in. Alexander helping with her mother's medical care, the generous payments for minor alterations, the contract offer, had it all been manipulation? A way to keep her distracted, compliant, while he destroyed her livelihood? "Alexander has always been skilled at getting what he wants," Janet said, watching Elena's face carefully, the Reed charm. "William had it too, from what I've heard." Elena closed the folder, pushing it back toward Janet. "Why are you showing me this?" "Professional courtesy. And perhaps, double quotes," Janet hesitated, a personal warning. Alexander Reed is his father's son, despite his efforts to prove otherwise. Don't make the mistake Carmen did, trusting a Reed man's promises. She left as quietly as she had arrived, leaving Elena standing amid her half-packed belongings. The foundation of her newfound trust in Alexander crumbling beneath her feet. Elena was still reeling from Janet's visit when her phone rang. "Alexander, the pilot needs another hour for flight preparations. We'll leave at 8 instead." Elena hesitated, Janet's revelations burning in her mind. "Alexander, I need to ask you something." "What is it?" "The development project. When does Phase 2 actually begin?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "January 15th, she continued, her voice tight. "Not 6 months from now. 3 weeks. Alexander sighed. "Who told you, Janet?" "Does it matter? It's true, isn't it?" "Yes, but you've known for weeks that my shop would be demolished in January, not June." Elena's anger built with each word. "All this time you've been helping with my mother's care, offering me contracts, playing the repentant son while planning to destroy my livelihood." "Elena, it's not that simple. Did you think I wouldn't find out? Or that I'd be so grateful for your help finding my grandmother that I wouldn't care?" She gripped the phone tighter. "Or was this all some elaborate game to keep me distracted while you moved your pieces into position?" "That's not fair." Alexander's voice hardened. "I've been honest with you about everything that matters. Except this." Elena laughed bitterly. "The one thing that directly impacts my life, my future. I was going to tell you after we returned from Mexico." "How convenient." "Damn it, Elena, listen to me." Frustration edged his voice. "Yes, the project timeline moved up. Yes, I should have told you immediately. But this search for your grandmother, that's real. My help with that is genuine." Elena wanted to believe him, but doubt had taken root. "I don't know what's real anymore. Alexander, I don't know if I can trust you." "Then don't come to Mexico," he said flatly. "Stay in New York, I'll go alone, and call you if I find anything." "Like hell you will." Elena's determination flared. "This is my grandmother we're looking for. My family's history. I'm going, with or without you." "Fine. The car will be there at 7:30. Alexander's voice was cold again. The wall rebuilt. The businessman returned. "We leave at 8, with or without you." He hung up before she could respond. Elena threw her phone onto the counter, frustration and confusion warring within her. Part of her wanted to believe Alexander, to trust that his help was genuine, despite his deception about the development timeline. Another part whispered that he was manipulating her, just as his father had manipulated her grandmother. Outside, snow had begun to fall, thick flakes swirling in the gathering darkness. Elena turned off the shop lights and headed upstairs to her apartment to finish packing. As she reached the top step, she smelled its smoke, acrid and heavy. She spun around. Orange light flickered beneath her shop door. Fire. Elena raced back, down the stairs, and threw open the door. Flames were already consuming the back wall where her fabric shelves stood. The old building's dry wood fed the blaze, which spread with terrifying speed. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911. Backing into the street as smoke billowed out behind her. The operator assured her fire crews were on their way, but Elena could see how quickly the flames were growing. Her shop, everything she'd built, would be gone before they arrived. Neighbors emerged from surrounding businesses. Someone handed her a blanket. Voices asked if she was hurt. Elena shook her head numbly, watching the flames consume her livelihood, her future. The fire department arrived within minutes, but the blaze had already spread to the cafe next door, the one with the closed for renovations sign. Both businesses were fully engulfed. Electrical fire, most likely, the fire chief told her later, as firefighters continued to douse the smoldering ruins. These old buildings have outdated wiring. You're lucky you were here when it started. Could have been much worse at night. Elena nodded mechanically, though she wasn't sure she felt lucky at all. Her shop was destroyed. Her apartment tanned, everything in it heavily damaged by smoke and water. Insurance would cover some of it, but rebuilding would take months. She didn't have not with the demolition scheduled for January. Ms. Vasquez, a uniformed police officer, approached. We need to ask you some questions about the fire. Elena answered automatically as she'd been upstairs packing. No, she hadn't noticed anything unusual earlier. Yes, the building was old, with original wiring. You were packing for a trip? The officer asked. Going somewhere? Mexico, Elena replied, her voice hollow. I was supposed to leave tonight. The officer made a note. Any enemies? Anyone who might want to harm you or your business? The question broke through Elena's shock. What are you suggesting? Just routine questions, ma'am. The officer's face was carefully neutral. The fire investigators will determine the cause. But the seed had been planted. The timing, hours before her trip to Mexico, weeks before scheduled demolitions, seemed too convenient to be coincidence. As if summoned by her thoughts. A black SUV pulled up to the police barricade. Alexander emerged, scanning the crowd until he spotted Elena. His face, normally so controlled, showed naked concern as he pushed through the onlookers. Elena, are you hurt? He reached for her, but she stepped back. I'm fine, just in shock. Alexander took in the scene, the destroyed shop, the firefighters, the police. What happened? Electrical fire, they think. Elena watched his face carefully. Convenient timing, isn't it? 3 weeks before your wrecking balls arrived? Alexander's expression shifted from concern to disbelief. You think I had something to do with this? Did you, for God's sake, Elena? Anger replaced the hurt in his eyes. I'm many things, but I'm not an arsonist. The police officer stepped closer. Sir? And you are? Alexander Reed. He didn't take his eyes off Elena, a friend of Ms. Vasquez. Alexander Reed, of Reed Enterprises. Yes. Alexander finally glanced at the officer. Is there a problem? No, sir. Just gathering information. The officer looked between them, sensing the tension. Ms. Vasquez mentioned she was leaving for Mexico tonight. That's right. A personal matter. Alexander turned back to Elena. We should still go. The plane is waiting. Elena laughed incredulously. My shop just burned down. My home is destroyed. And you want me to just leave? There's nothing you can do here tonight, Alexander said pragmatically. The insurance investigators won't start until morning. We can still make it to Mexico and back before they need your input. He was right, and Elena knew it. There was nothing she could do here. Now, her grandmother, if she was alive, had waited 48 years. She couldn't wait much longer. I need clothes, she said finally. Everything I packed is ruined. We'll buy what you need in Mexico. Alexander gestured to the waiting SUV. Your mother is already at the airport. Janet brought her. The mention of Janet sent a fresh wave of suspicion through Elena. Did Janet tell you she visited me earlier? Showed me the development plans? Alexander's jaw tightened. No, but it doesn't surprise me. Janet is protective of you. Or the company, both. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Elena, I swear to you, I had nothing to do with this fire. I would never. I want to believe you, she interrupted. But right now, I don't know what to believe. They stood in tense silence, the barrier of suspicion between them seemingly insurmountable. Finally, Alexander spoke. Come to Mexico, find your grandmother. After that, if you never want to see me again, I'll understand. Elena looked back at the smoldering ruins of her shop, 5 years of work, of dreams, reduced to ash and charred wood, then to Alexander, whose face showed a vulnerability she'd rarely glimpsed beneath his controlled exterior. All right, she said finally, to Mexico. But this doesn't mean I trust you. I know. Alexander opened the SUV door, but it's a start. La Casa de Descanso stood on a hillside outside Mexico City, its cream-colored walls and red-tiled roof blending with the landscape. Bougainvillea cascaded over the entrance gate, creating a deceptively welcoming facade for what was essentially a high-end prison for the wealthy, troubled. It's beautiful, Luisa murmured as their hired car approached. Beauty can hide many sins, Alexander replied, his expression grim. The facility's director, Dr. Navarro, met them in a tastefully appointed office. He was polite but firm. Patient confidentiality was absolute. He could neither confirm nor deny that anyone named Carmen Vasquez or Isabella Diaz had ever been a resident. Perhaps if you could tell me why you're inquiring? he suggested, studying the three of them with professional curiosity. Luisa leaned forward. I'm looking for my mother. She disappeared in 1975. We have reason to believe she may have been brought here. Dr. Navarro's expression revealed nothing. I understand your concerns, Senora, but our policy is my father paid for her care. Alexander interrupted. William Reed. For decades, something flickered in the director's ease recognition. Reed, yes, I remember the name. The payments stopped rather abruptly some years ago. When my father died, Alexander confirmed. What happened to the patient? He was supporting. Dr. Navarro hesitated, clearly weighing professional ethics against the reality of the powerful man before him. Perhaps if you could provide proof of relation, medical records, birth certificates. Elena pulled out her mother's birth certificate, showing Carmen Vasquez as the mother. Will this suffice? The director examined it, then nodded slowly. Please, wait here. When he left, Alexander turned to them. He knows something, but will he tell us? Elena wondered. They waited in tense silence until Dr. Navarro returned with a thin file folder. I can confirm that we did have a patient. Under the name Isabella Diaz, admitted in November 1975, he opened the folder. She was brought here by a Mr. William Reed, who arranged for her long-term care and paid for all expenses. Luisa gasped. She was here, all this time, until 2013. Yes. Dr. Navarro consulted the file. When the payments stopped, we attempted to contact Mr. Reed but received no response. After 6 months, as per our policy, the patient was transferred. Transferred where? Alexander demanded. To a state facility in Mexico City, La Esperanza. The director's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry, it's not the same standard of care we provide here. Is she still alive? Luisa's voice broke on the question. As of the transfer, yes, but that was 12 years ago. Dr. Navarro closed the file. I can give you the address of La Esperanza, but I must warn you it's a difficult place. And after so many years, Elena took her mother's trembling hand. What was her condition when she left here? Physically, relatively healthy for her age? Mentally, ... The director chose his words carefully. The patient suffered from what we would now call complex PTSD, with episodes of dissociation. She was largely nonverbal for many years, though she had improved somewhat by the time of transfer. Nonverbal. Due to trauma? Alexander asked. That was our assessment? Yes. Dr. Navarro hesitated. There was also a notation in her admission records about a head injury. Alexander's face hardened. Inflicted by whom? The records don't specify. Only that she arrived with partially healed trauma to the left temporal region. The director handed Alexander a slip of paper. This is the address for La Esperanza. I wish you luck. Back in the car, Luisa broke down. Decades of grief overwhelming her. He hurt her. William hurt my mother, and then locked her away. Alexander stared out the window, his profile rigid with controlled anger. I'm sorry, Luisa, for what my father did. It wasn't your fault, she said through her tears. You were just a child, but I've benefited from his wealth, his power. Alexander turned to face them. Wealth built on silence and suffering. Elena watched this exchange, her own anger at Alexander temporarily forgotten in the face of this larger tragedy. We need to go to this other facility, today. La Esperanza was a stark contrast to La Casa de Descanso, a crumbling concrete structure in a neglected part of the city, surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. Inside, the smell of disinfectant barely masked other, less pleasant odors. The administrator was more easily persuaded than Dr. Navarro, especially after Alexander discreetly passed him an envelope of cash. He led them through dingy hallways to a records room, where a board clerk searched through files. Isabella Diaz, she confirmed, pulling out a folder. Admitted July 2014 from La Casa de Descanso, still a resident. Luisa gripped Elena's arm so tightly it hurt. She's alive. My mother is alive. The clerk checked the file again. Sir, in the East Wing, long-term care for the elderly. They followed the administrator through more hallways, past rooms filled with vacant-eyed patients, some calling out as they passed. The East Wing was marginally better, cleaner, quieter, with a small courtyard visible through barred windows. Room 217, the administrator said, stopping outside a door. I must warn you, many of our older patients are not ... responsive. He knocked once, then opened the door. The woman sitting by the window was small, her once black hair now completely white, her brown skin lined with age. She wore a simple blue dress and had a shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the warmth of the day. She didn't turn as they entered. Senora Diaz, the administrator said loudly, you have visitors. No response. Luisa stepped forward hesitantly. Mama, it's Luisa. The old woman continued staring out the window. She doesn't speak much, the administrator explained, and her hearing isn't good. Luisa moved closer, kneeling before her mother. Mama, please, it's me and your daughter. Slowly, Carmen Vasquez turned her head, her eyes still sharp despite her years focused on Luisa's face. For a long moment, there was no recognition. Then her gaze sharpened, and her hand gnarled with arthritis, reached out to touch Louisa's cheek. "Me, Nina," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "Me, Louisa." Louisa broke down, laying her head in her mother's lap as she had as a child. Carmen stroked her hair with trembling fingers, tears streaming silently down her wrinkled face. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, watching her mother reunite with the grandmother she'd thought lost forever. Behind her, Alexander remained silent, a witness to the healing of one family's wound, a wound his own had inflicted. Carmen's eyes found Elena Aubert daughter's head. "Quién is?" she asked softly. "Your granddaughter?" Louisa managed through her tears. "Elena, my daughter." Carmen beckoned with a crooked finger. Elena approached cautiously, kneeling beside her mother. The old woman studied her face intently, then touched her cheek, her chin, her eyes. "See," she said finally. "Mis ojos." "My eye." Then her gaze shifted to the doorway, where Alexander stood. Something flickered across her face. Fear, recognition, confusion. "El Niño," she whispered. "Little lion." Alexander stepped forward, his usual confidence gone. "You remember me?" Carmen nodded slowly. "Alexander, William's son." Her eyes clouded. "But not William." "No," he agreed softly, "not William." Carmen studied him for a long moment, then turned back to Louisa. "Home," she said simply. "Take me home and Jess." "Mama." Louisa clutched her mother's hands. "We're taking you home." Alexander was already on his phone, speaking rapidly in fluent Spanish. When he finished, he turned to them. "I've arranged for an immediate transfer to a private facility in New York. A medical transport plane will be ready tomorrow morning." "Thank you," Louisa said, looking up from where she still knelt beside her mother, "for helping us find her." Alexander nodded once, then stepped out into the hallway, giving the reunited family privacy. Elena followed him. "Why did your father do it?" she asked quietly. "Lock her away like this?" Alexander's expression was bleak. Fear, probably. Carmen knew about Michael. Threatened to expose the affair, the child? It would have destroyed him socially, possibly professionally. He sighed. Or maybe he did care for her, in his way. This might have seemed more merciful than other options. Merciful. Elena's voice rose. 48 years in institutions. "I'm not defending him," Alexander said sharply, "just trying to understand." He looked back at the room where Carmen sat with Louisa. "At least she's alive. At least we found her." Elena nodded slowly. "Yes, at least we found her." The anger between them had dissolved, replaced by a somber recognition of the damage the past had inflicted and the long road to healing that lay ahead. 6 months later, Elena stood in her new shop arranging spools of thread in a vintage cabinet. Sunlight streamed through the large front windows, illuminating the space she'd created from the ashes of her old life. The shop was only 3 blocks from her previous location, but worlds away in terms of visibility and foot traffic. The rent was higher, but the investment had already paid off with an influx of new clients, many referred by Alexander's business associates. The bell above the door chimed. Elena looked up to see Michael Caldwell hesitating in the doorway, his expression uncertain. "Michael," she said warmly, "come in. I was just setting up." He stepped inside, glancing around with appreciation. "The shop looks wonderful. Very. Thank you." Elena wiped her hands on her apron. "How are you settling in?" "Still adjusting," he admitted. "Moving from London to New York at my age wasn't in my retirement plan. But your architectural consulting firm is doing well." "From what I hear," Michael smiled. Alexander has been generous with introductions. His smile faded slightly. "Sometimes I wonder if it's guilt or genuine goodwill." "Both, probably," Elena said honestly. "But does it matter?" "I suppose not." Michael moved to examine a bolt of fabric. "How is she today, Carmen?" "Good days and bad. Today was good. She's teaching my mother to make tamales. The recipe she used to make for you." Michael's eyes missed. "She remembers that." "She remembers everything about you," Elena assured him. The little boy she watched from a distance. Her son. After returning from Mexico, Alexander had kept his promise to contact Michael. The revelation of his true parentage had initially been met with shock and denial, but DNA tests had confirmed the truth. Michael had flown to New York, met with Alexander, then with Carmen, Louisa, and Elena. The reunion had been painful, emotional, complicated, but healing had begun. "I'm still not sure what to call her," Michael confessed. "Carmen feels too informal for a woman I've just met. Mother feels like a betrayal of the woman who raised me." "Give it time," Elena advised. "You've only known the truth for 5 months." Michael nodded, then glanced at his watch. "I should go. I'm meeting Alexander for lunch. Just wanted to stop by and see the new shop." "I'm glad you did." Elena hesitated, then added, "He's trying, you know, Alexander, to make amends for his father's actions." "I know." Michael's expression softened. "He's not William. I'm grateful for that." After Michael left, Elena returned to her organizing, thoughts turning to Alexander. Their relationship had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a partnership built on shared trauma and tentative trust. The fire at her shop had indeed been electrical, as investigators confirmed. Alexander had been cleared of any suspicion, though Elena had been ashamed to admit she'd harbored doubts. In the months since, he'd helped her find the new location and navigate the insurance claims, but had respected her need for independence, never offering financial assistance beyond connecting her with clients. The development project that would have demolished her old shop was proceeding on schedule, but Alexander had made changes to the overall plan, incorporating affordable retail, spaces for local businesses displaced by construction, and creating a community fund to support neighborhood entrepreneurs. Small steps toward redemption, perhaps, but sincere ones. The shop door opened again. This time it was Louisa, her face more relaxed than Elena had seen it in years. "Mama, I thought you were cooking with abuela today," she tired quickly. Louisa looked around the shop appreciatively. "Everything is coming together beautifully. Just in time for the grand opening next week." Elena wiped dust from a shelf. "How is abuela doing with her therapy?" "Dr. Rios says she's making remarkable progress for someone who was institutionalized so long." Louisa's eyes shone with pride. She spoke 3 full sentences in English today. Carmen's recovery had been slow but steady. After decades of language was returning, Spanish first, then bits of English. Physical therapy was helping with her mobility. Cognitive therapy was gradually rebuilding the connections trauma had severed. "And you?" Elena asked. "How are you doing with all of this?" Louisa considered the question. "I'm healing, having Mama back. Even like this, it fills a hole I've carried my whole life." She straightened a display of buttons. "Michael invited us to dinner tomorrow. He wants Carmen to meet his wife. That's a big step." "Yes, I think he's finally accepting her as ... if not his mother, then family." Louisa smiled. "And his wife seems lovely. Eager to know Carmen and Alexander." Elena tried to keep her tone casual. "Will he be there?" Louisa gave her daughter a knowing look. "He was invited. I don't know if he accepted." They worked in companionable silence for a while, arranging displays and unpacking inventory. Finally, Louisa spoke again. "He cares for you, you know, more than he can express." Elena focused on threading a needle. "We've been through a lot together. It's more than that." Louisa touched her daughter's shoulder. "The way he looks at you, when he thinks no one notices." "Mama, I'm not pushing," Louisa assured her, "just observing. You've both been shaped by the same tragedy, but in different ways. Perhaps together, you can reshape something beautiful from it." Elena had no answer. For that, her feelings for Alexander were complicated: respect, gratitude, anger, attraction, all tangled together like threads in a complex embroidery. "I should get back to abuela," Louisa said, kissing Elena's cheek. "Don't work too late." After her mother left, Elena continued, setting up, losing herself in the methodical work. The rhythmic organization of her tools and materials had always brought her peace, even as a child. As evening approached, she moved to the work table at the back of the shop, where a familiar garment lay waiting: Alexander's cashmere coat, the one that had started everything. He'd brought it in last week, claiming the lining needed repair again. Though Elena had found nothing wrong with her previous work, she lifted it now, running her fingers along the seams, remembering the moment she'd first discovered the photograph of her grandmother hidden in its lining. How different her life had been then. How unaware she'd been of the connections waiting to be uncovered. The bell above the door chimed once more. Elena didn't need to look up to know who it was. "You're working late," Alexander said, his voice warm. "Grand opening next week. Everything has to be perfect." Elena gestured to the coat. "I examined the lining. It's fine." Alexander smiled slightly. "Is it? I could have sworn there was a tear." "You made an excuse to visit," she translated, returning his smile. "Guilty." He moved deeper into the shop, admiring the transformation. "This place suits you. Better visibility, better foot traffic, better rent, too," Elena said wryly. "Worth every penny." Alexander stopped before her workbench. "I spoke with Michael today. He's invited me to dinner tomorrow with Carmen and your mother. Are you going?" "I thought we might go together." He met her eyes. "If you'd like." Elena considered him this complex man who had become so unexpectedly central to her life. The past 6 months had changed him. The cold corporate mask had softened, revealing the thoughtful, wounded person beneath. "I'd like that," she said simply. Alexander nodded, relief visible in the slight relaxation of his shoulders. "Good. That's good." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the evening light casting long shadows through the shop windows. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" Elena said finally. "Bound by our family's mistakes. Trying to create something better. Is that what we're doing?" Alexander asked softly. "Creating something better?" Elena looked around her new shop, thought of her grandmother relearning how to speak, of Michael and his cautious steps toward accepting his true heritage, of Alexander's efforts to use his power for rehabilitation rather than destruction. "Yes," she said. "I think we are." 1 year to the day after Elena had found the photograph in Alexander's coat, she stood in her thriving shop, putting the final touches on a wedding dress alteration. The bell above the door chimed, and she looked up to see Alexander entering, a garment bag draped over his arm. "Right on time," she said, smiling. "I just finished Mrs. Chun's dress. It's beautiful," he commented, admiring the intricate beadwork. "You're an artist, Elena." She felt herself flush slightly at the genuine admiration in his voice. after a year of careful rebuilding of trust, of relationship, of family connections, was still adjusting to the way Alexander looked at her now. Without barriers, without calculation, "What have you brought me?" she asked, nodding toward the garment bag. "An old friend." Alexander laid the bag on her counter and unzipped it, revealing the cashmere coat that had started everything. "I thought it appropriate, given the anniversary." Elena ran her hand over the familiar fabric. "A year ago today, a year that changed everything." Alexander watched her face. "I've been thinking about patterns lately, sewing patterns." Elena teased, knowing that wasn't what he meant. "Life patterns." He smiled at her gentle mockery. "My father had a pattern control, manipulation, secrets. I followed it for years without questioning. And now I'm creating a new pattern." He gestured around her shop. "With your help?" The past year had indeed been transformative. Reed Enterprises had launched a neighborhood revitalization fund, focusing on preserving small businesses in gentrifying areas. Alexander had stepped back from daily operations, appointing Janet as CEO while he focused on the foundation's work. And most significantly, he'd reached out to Michael, forming a cautious but genuine brotherhood. "The coat needs something," Alexander said, interrupting her thoughts. "A new lining, perhaps." Elena raised an eyebrow. "The lining is perfectly fine. Humor me." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, velvet box. "I thought perhaps this could be sewn into a special pocket, somewhere safe." Elena's breath caught as she looked at the box. "Alexander, open it," he urged softly. Inside was not a ring, as she'd momentarily feared, but a pendant in antique silver locket. Elena opened it to find two photographs. On one side, Carmen, as a young woman, the original photograph from the coat. On the other, a recent picture of Carmen with Louisa, Elena, and Michael, taken at Carmen's 85th birthday celebration. "It's beautiful," Elena whispered. "Perfect. I thought you might create a special place for it in the coat." Alexander explained, "Not hidden away, as before, but protected, honored." The symbolism wasn't lost on Elena, the past acknowledged, preserved, but integrated into the present with care rather than secrecy. "I know exactly where it should go," she said, already envisioning the pocket she would create near the heart of the coat. Alexander watched as she examined the garment, her skilled hands assessing and planning. "There's something else I wanted to discuss with you," he said after a moment. "The Reed Foundation." Elena looked up. "What about it?" "I'd like to establish a scholarship for first-generation immigrant students studying fashion design or textile arts." He met her eyes. "In Carmen's name." Elena set down the coat, deeply touched. "She would be honored. As am I. There's more." Alexander took a deep breath. "I'd like you to chair the scholarship committee, help select recipients, mentor them. Your expertise would be invaluable." "I'd love to," Elena said without hesitation. "It's a wonderful idea." Alexander smiled, relief evident in his expression. "Good." That single quotes Good. They'd fallen into this pattern over the months, his tentative offers of partnership, her acceptance, both of them gradually building something neither had anticipated when they'd first met. "Will you come to dinner tonight?" Elena asked. "Abuela is teaching me her famous chocolate cake with cinnamon. Your favorite, apparently. I wouldn't miss it." Alexander's expression softened. "How is she doing?" "Better every week. She's speaking in complete sentences most days now, and she asks about you often." Elena smiled. "Her little lion." A shadow crossed Alexander's face. "I still find it hard to reconcile the woman who was so kind to me as a child, and what my father did to her." "She's reconciled it," Elena said gently. "Perhaps you should try." Alexander nodded, though they both knew it wasn't that simple. The past year had been one of reckoning for him with his father's actions, with his own complicity in systems of power that crushed the vulnerable, with the legacy he wanted to leave versus the one he'd inherited. "Michael's coming tonight too," Elena added, "with Sarah and the kids." "The whole family," Alexander murmured, still getting used to the concept. "Yes, a rather complicated, unexpected family." Elena picked up the coat again. "I'll have this ready by tonight, with a special pocket for the locket." "Thank you." Alexander hesitated, then added, "Not just for the coat, for everything. This past year has changed us both." Elena finished for him. He nodded, relief in his eyes at being understood without having to find the words. Later that evening, Elena's apartment was filled with the warmth of family and the rich scent of Carmen's chocolate cake. The small dining table barely accommodated them, all Carmen at the head, with Louisa beside her, Michael and his wife Sarah with their teenage children. Elena and Alexander, completing the circle. Carmen, though still frail, presided over the gathering with quiet dignity. Her English remained halting, but her presence was commanding. When she spoke, everyone listened. "Family," she said, raising her glass of water with a slightly trembling hand. Together, two simple words that encompassed a journey of decades of loss, discovery, reconciliation. Together, they echoed, raising their glasses as they ate. Conversation flowed easily between English and Spanish. Michael's children peppered Carmen with questions about Mexico, which she answered with growing confidence. Louisa and Sarah discussed the children's education. Alexander spoke quietly with Michael about the Foundation's latest project. Elena observed it all, marveling at how this unlikely family had formed from broken pieces. Her gaze met Alexander's across the table, and the understanding that passed between them needed no words. After dinner, while the others moved to the living room for coffee, Elena slipped away to retrieve Alexander's coat. She found him on her small balcony, looking out at the city lights. "It's finished," she said, holding out the coat. "Try it on." Alexander slipped it over his shoulders, his hand automatically finding the new pocket she'd created in the lining. The locket was securely sewn in place, accessible but protected. "Perfect," he said softly. "I also added something else." Elena touched a small embroidery on the inside collar barely visible unless one knew to look for it. A tiny lion, stitched in golden thread. Alexander's fingers traced the delicate needlework. "Elena ... a reminder," she said simply, "of who you choose to be, not just who you were born to be." He took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I'm still figuring that out." "We all are," Elena replied. "That's the point." From inside the apartment came the sound of laughter, Carmen's, soft but distinct, joined by the brighter tones of Michael's children. A family healing, one stitch at a time. "Shall we go back in?" Elena asked. "Abuela will want you to try her cake." Alexander nodded, but didn't release her hand. In a moment, they stood together in the gentle evening air, their joined hands a bridge between past and future, between hurt and healing. Neither knew exactly what shape their relationship would ultimately take, but the pattern they were creating together was intentional. Thoughtful, stronger, new design built from the fragments of the old. "Ready?" Elena asked after a moment. Alexander smiled, squeezing her hand gently. "Ready?" They returned to the warmth of the gathering, to the family that had formed through chance and choice, and the courage to mend what had once seemed irreparably broken. Alexander's coat, with its precious hidden photograph now properly secured rather than concealed, hung by the door, a reminder of how a single discovered thread could unravel decades of secrets, and how skilled hands could weave something beautiful from the tattered remains.